What did Lady Jessica actually think when she bore a son? The spice maker sandtrout cycle binds Arrakis, yet its origins slumber deeper. The Buddelrian Jihad's first century birthed horse machines unmade, but something else festered. A failed experiment, forgotten by empires, curdled into Melange. The Bene Tleilax didn't chase power. They hunted a shadow older than the god emperor, a truth sandworms now digest. What if the spice's heartbeat is not the desert's, but a wound that never clotted? The spice's pulse quickens. Imperium thrives on fractured orders, each a thread in a loom not their own. Bene Tleilax breed not for profit, but panic. They chase a scent older than Arrakis, a formula lost when the first thinking machines bled into sand. The god emperor's reign hinges on a lie, that Melange is the desert's gift. What if it is a relic of the Jihad's first wound, a toxin meant to purge humanity's gods? The Bene Gesserit's golden path walks a tightrope. One step misplaces the spice's origin, and the 3,500-year stillness fractures. The worms digest history. But hunger outlives emperors. In the god emperor's 13,725th year, the Bene Tleilax tend axolotl tanks beneath Arrakian's ruins-glass chambers humming with biotech machinery, their sterile tang mingling with the sour heat of desert air. Fetal forms writhe in amber liquid, genetic blueprints of vanished species, each cell a rebellion against erasure. Above ground, the Gesserit's hidden sanctums burn with oil lamp smoke, their whispered prayers threading through vaults where pre-imperial texts are ash. A Tleilax geneticist, gloved hands trembling, peers into a tank where a sandworm embryo pulses in reverse, its DNA spooling backward toward a dawn the Gesserit buried. The spice, they whisper, is no desert birth, it is a scar. A failed synthetic from the Jihad's first century, its molecules screaming of a lost war to merge machine and human. The Tleilax know this not through discovery but through the gaps. The way certain genes reject the spice, as if remembering a time before its godhood. The Gesserit guard history's corpse. The Tleilax in their cold tanks listen to its heartbeat. The spice's first synthesis occurred during the Buddelrian Jihad's failed human-AI hybrid experiments, later corrupted by the Bene Gesserit. A scar in the fabric of time. The Tleilax in their cold tanks did not chase power, they chased a ghost. Their ancestors, long before the god emperor gnarled the stars, glimpsed whispers in the chemical lattice, a compound born not of sand nor scale, but of hubris. The Jihad's war machines, those iron husks stripped of sentience, left more than ash. They left a residue, a mutation. The Gesserit, stewards of stolen memory, buried this truth beneath layers of myth. They knew the spice was a wound, not a gift. Its golden flow masked a deeper rota synthesis meant to bind human mind to machine, shattered by the same crusade that raised thinking engines. The Tleilax, parsing fragments from the void, pieced together a heresy. Melange predated the empire's birth. They scoured their vats for answers, not to rule but to remember, to reclaim a past the Gesserit had sterilized. The god emperor, blind to the shadow behind him, built his divinity on a lie. The spice did not choose Arrakis. It was exiled there, a failed experiment cast into the desert's maw. And now, as the Tleilax twist their grotesque alchemy, they ask, what if the key to unmaking the god emperor lies not in his children, but in the dust of a war he never knew? The axolotl tanks do not breed killers, they cradle ghosts. In their cold vats, the Tleilaxu preserve genetic fragments, peacemakers, warlords, saints, shards of a world the Bene Gesserit scrubbed from the stars. These tanks are not weapons, they are obituaries. The spice does not belong to Shai Hulud, its scent lingers from older sins. Before the god emperor's ascension, before the guild's grip, there were axolotl lines whispering of Melange in the blood. The Tleilaxu did not seek power. They clawed at the edges of a truth buried beneath sand and silence. That spice is not the desert's gift, but its ransom. A failed experiment, a shattered mind. Some say the first spice was born not in the dunes, but in the vaults where the thinking machines were unmade. The Buddelrian Jihad's victors left no records, the losers left no bodies. Only the axolotl tanks remember. The Bene Gesserit call this era before time. They have not erased the past, they have drowned it in a sea of their own making. Every spice laid in breath, every emperor's ascension, Everywhere is a dirge for knowledge the Tleilaxu cannot name. They breed not to conquer, but to salvage. To stitch flesh from the bones of a forgotten war. What if the God Emperor's undoing is written in the DNA of those he never knew? The answer lies not in his children. Not in his legends, in the hollow victory of a species that turned its grief into a drug. The spice is a wound, a question. And the Tleilaxu, mourning in their tanks, are the only ones who remember asking it first. The Tleilaxu carved their temples into the bones of dead gods. They sought not to master spice, but to unmake its silence. Leto Roman II rode the sandtrout's pulse, a symbiosis older than empire. The Tleilaxu pumped axolotl tanks with stolen DNA, chasing a shadow. Spice was not a prize to harvest, it was a language the desert refused to forget. What use are axolotl tanks to a species that never learned to listen? The sandtrout coiled in Leto's veins, they drowned in the Tleilax's glass. Each failed batch of Melange blackened their ledgers, a debt to history they could not pay. They called it defiance, the desert called it hubris. The spice maker cycle is not a loop, it is a requiem for a name lost before Paul Atreides first knelt in the sand. The Imperium's biologists dissected a hymn, thinking it a blueprint. They grafted worm gene to trout gene, ignorant of the price already paid. Leto's body became the bridge between species, theirs became a mausoleum of dead hybrids. The rage is not in their failure. It is in their certainty that the answer lay in the next experiment. Not in the truth that the answer had already walked the dunes, sand in his hair, eyes burning with the weight of millennia. The spice was never theirs to re-engineer. It was a scar left by the thing they could not unmake. The Baudelairian chains still clink in its DNA. The Tleilaxu knew this. They only ever sought to scream into the void that birthed it. And the void, as always, swallowed their voice whole. The Bene Gesserit's knives cut deeper than names. They gutted the pre-imperial dark so the void itself seems natural. Yet the Tleilaxu horde scrolls that whisper of spice before the God Emperor's shadow. How? Their records teem with contradiction states that spiral backward, beyond the scattering, beyond the jihad's first century. A time when Melange was not harvest but accident. A failed alchemy maybe, a poison meant to bind thinking machines left to fester in desert veins. The Imperium's chains depend on blind faith in order. But the Tleilaxu know, if spice was never meant to be, then every breath of it is a theft from something older than fear. They chase ghosts not to control but to confess, to prove the void has memory, and still their truths unravel. The more they stitch, the more the fabric bleeds. What if their obsession is not a key but a curse? A mirror held up to the face of whatever died to make the sand sing. Bene Tleilax axolotl tanks don't just breed bodies, they preserve knowledge. Each vat hums with a question older than the empire. What did the sandworms inherit? The answer lies buried in the Baudelairian jihad's first century. Before the God Emperor, before the Bene Gesserit's culling, there existed a science now called myth. The Tleilaxu call it *origin*. Their obsession is not with spice itself, it is with its asterisk maker *. The axolotl tanks hold more than genetic blueprints, they hold fragmented data, corrupted schematics of a lost process. A process the Bene Gesserit could not erase. Not fully, the records, but some sought to spices replicate their power through organic chemistry means. The Tleilaxu read it in the molecular scars. Banned but not the thinking memory machines, yes, but some sought to spices replicate their power through organic. A failed experiment birthed Melange. The spice was not designed, it was residue *, a byproduct of a shattered dream to fuse human will with machine precision. The Bene Gesserit scrubbed this history from the imperial memory, yet the Tleilaxu, outsiders to the purge, pieced fragments together. They chase not power but closure, a formula buried beneath millennia of lies. The axolotl tanks are not just tools. They are tombs for a forgotten science. And in their depths, the Tleilaxu whisper to the shadows, * what did we try to become? * the answer festers in every grain of spice. A shadow of the war that never ended. The whisper in the spice does not come from worms, it lingers from a war older than Arrakis. In the first century of the Baudelairian jihad, machines were not just unmad, they were * reborn * in flesh. A sect of thinkers sought to fuse human minds with computational echoes to create a god without gears. The spice was their failure. A residue of consciousness, unshaped, unstable. When the god emperor's shadow stretched across 3,500 years, the Bene Gesserit did not erase spice's origin. They let it rot, let the truth crumble like a sandcastle. The Tleilax did not crave Melange for power. They scoured its chemistry for a ghost, a formula for the synthesis that never took flight, a key to the that bound the emperor's reign. They mined not for immortality, but for memory. For every stillsuit stitch, every breath on the dunes carried a question. Asterisk, what were we trying to kill? Asterisk, the answer lay buried in the spice's DNA blueprint of hubris. But the BG had already rewritten the stars. The Tleilax's labs became tombs, their zeal a self-buried scream. They knew too late the emperor's rule was not built on spice. It was built on the silence of those who remembered asterisk. And so the Tleilax burned, not for defying the god, for daring to recall the war that made him. The Tleilax burned for remembering what the empire could not unmake. Beneath their spice works, they dug not for power but answers. The Gesserit had raised the past, yet the Tleilax knew Melange's first breath predated the emperor's womb. A forgotten war's shadow lingered in every grain. Why then did the matters rise in asterisk heretics asterisk, claws raking the Gesserit's curated truth? What if the spice's scent led not to gods, but to a corpse older than the Kwisatz? The Tleilax's serpent slithered closer to a secret the Imperium dared not bury, for in the sand silence the first jihad screamed. And the matters, they heard it too. Matters bled for it, Tleilax clawed at its roots. The spice's first breath, was it a weapon or a wound? The god emperor's shadow swallowed ancient truths, but the matters, reborn from the ashes, hunted what he buried. They knew, they always knew. What did they take when they fell? The answer lies beneath the first